Hi, I'm Claire Parr with Live in the Vineyard, and this is Bobby Hawk Jacobs.
Hi.
And it's early in the morning on a beautiful morning in Napa, and we are here at Trefethen Vineyards with Lauren Trefethen, who has gotten up nice and early to...
Just for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very
to
much.
talk to us about the wine and the vineyard and the incredible history of their family. And that's where we're going to start, is with you telling us a little bit about Trefethen family's history and your family's acquisition of the vineyard and all that good stuff. So.
Okay, yeah, well, it starts actually a long time ago for California at any rate. Back in the 1850s, the vineyard that we're standing on was one of the top vineyards in Napa Valley, really defined Napa Valley as the premium wine growing region in California for the first time during an agricultural fair in San Francisco. And it was called Eshkol at the time, and the Eshkol Cabernet, and they were also producing a Simeon dessert wine, took gold medals at the viticultural fair and really set the standard for all of California. And they started to look to Napa as the place to grow great wine.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, and Napa actually went through a little boom. And toward the end of the 1800s, there were 140 wineries in this valley.
Wow.
Wow.
And then a few things happened. We had two World Wars, we had a Great Depression, we had that great American experiment, Prohibition, and we also had a root louse that started to show up in the soil called phylloxera, and that just slowly started to kill the vines. And so all of those factors combined really drove a stake through the heart of the American wine industry. And by 1968, which is when my grandfather decided to get into the business of growing grapes, Napa Valley had been all but forgotten. This was in agricultural backwaters of San Francisco. They were producing beef, walnuts, apricots, prunes, in that order.
Wow.
Grapes were way down on the list. We'd gone from 140 wineries in the late 1800s to somewhere between 15 and 25, depending on what your definition of a producing actual winery is. But my grandfather came and bought the historic Eshkol estate and also put together a few adjoining farms and formed what's now Trefethen Vineyard. The Trefethen dinners were made with vegetables that my Nana had grown, fresh vegetables from her garden, and it was served with this stuff that no one had experienced before, this wine stuff from France, this Bordeaux, and no one knew that it could taste like it did. And so when my grandfather wanted to get back into agriculture, they'd been poking around this valley, fell in love with the beauty really first, and then decided, well, instead of growing walnuts, which was really the money crop at the time, we're going to rip out some orchards and plant grapevines. And they were absolutely crazy to be doing that. All of their friends thought that they had gone senile.
When was the winery actually built?
The winery was built, so this building right behind us, which is covered by this nice front of trees, was built in 1886 as a winery, and is the only remaining wooden gravity flow winery in the United States. It's a National Historic Landmark, actually, and it's a very, very cool place. There's no other place, I think, that gives you a sense for what winemaking was like in the 1800s in Napa, better than the inside of this place. And miraculously, after being unused as anything really for 40 years, I mean, there were farms around here, and this was just sitting fallow.
So, Lauren,
Yes.
your dad, the trash can making exploding winery.
Winemaker.
Now, was he responsible for making the Chardonnay that actually won your family so many awards and kind of put the vineyard on the map from a critical standpoint?
Yeah, so got our Chardonnay on the table, and this is really the wine that made us famous. And my dad did make our 1976 vintage of Chardonnay. He had a little help.
Not in a trash can. I
Not in a
imagine.
trash can.
Yeah.
We stopped making them in trash cans
That's
right about the time that we started selling them. The basement exploding wines were just for personal consumption. But our first vintage was 73. And just 4 vintages in 1976, my father and David Whitehouse, who was trained at UC Davis, but that was his very first year with us, made a Chardonnay that has a really incredible story behind it. So 76 we grew it, 77 we made it, 78 we bottled it. In 1979, a crazy friend of ours who was living in Paris decided to enter the Chardonnay in what was at the time the largest wine tasting the world had ever seen.
And was this with your family's knowledge, or was this just, I'm going to
No,
put this in?
no,
And we
there
just
was,
decided we're going to volunteer that this wine
So
is
in
gonna go
1976, 2 things happened. We made the Chardonnay. The other thing that happened was, again in France, this crazy Englishman by the name of Stephen Spurrier held a very informal tasting where some unknown California wineries, almost all of them from Napa, trumped some of the top French names in a very informal tasting. If you've seen the movie Bottle Shock,
Yes.
that's what
That's
it's
what
about.
I was going to ask you, if
And-
Bottle Shock was about that.
And we
Which
were
is
not
a
part
great
of that.
movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But-
Alan Rickman, love the guy.
Yeah.
But it didn't really have the effect that it's been made out to have. It wasn't like suddenly everyone stopped drinking French wine and
Right.
went to California. There was suddenly some interest in what the Californians were doing, but as my mother puts it, we started to be able to sell our wine on the East Coast. That was
That's
the
as far
extent.
as it
That's as
took it.
far as we
Okay.
went.
All right.
It was still taken for granted that this was sort of a one-off fluke. Great wine still came from France and really nowhere else.
Right.
But the French, as they tend to do, were kind of miffed that they'd been beaten. This was sort of their one holdout.
Right.
They were the champions of wine. That was their domain. And so in 79, to prove it, they organized the largest wine tasting the world has had ever seen. And this crazy friend of ours who was living in Paris had a few bottles of our 76 Chardonnay and just thought it would be fun to enter
But
it
it
in the
is.
competition. And it won.
So was it
were-
a blind tasting,
Of
basically?
course.
So
If
it
they had
had
seen
to
the
have been a
label,
blind
They would have.
tasting.
They would have been like,
him at the very bottom. Didn't matter how good it tasted.
Sure, absolutely.
They were going to make sure that a French wine won this
Yeah.
competition. And we were every top Burgundy producer was there. They tasted almost 1,000 wines, which in
Wow.
79 was just about everyone. And we were declared best Chardonnay in the world in 1979.
Well, can we taste
we
and
should
try
taste.
a little of the
This
Chardonnay?
is the current vintage, the 2006 Estate Chardonnay.
Right.
And
What is the price point on this wine?
this wine's $30 a bottle. And it
Thank you.
actually just
Thank you very
came
much.
back again from Europe
Cheers.
with a gold medal.
Cheers, indeed.
Cheers, cheers. Enjoy.